Hi, this is Chris. Welcome back to the channel. So today I just want to talk about the Christopher Watts case. There's just some new information that's circling, and also a very important blog post that has just recently been put out by Detective Dave Baumhover, who was of course the lead investigator on the Chris Watts case, and I think it's a very important blog post that needs to be heard by as many people as possible on YouTube and social media who are interested in the Christopher Watts case. And the other news we have is that Chris Watts is planning an appeal. This is what we're hearing. There's been a telephone call that's been released recently on YouTube. It's out there if you go and find it. It's between Chris Watts and his friend Anna and some legal guy. Don't know who it is, but sounds like he's been spending a lot of time looking through the law books, and he wants to try and get out. So we'll talk about that a bit after. But first, I just want to cover this blog post by Dave Baumhover. It speaks for itself, to be perfectly honest. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, as I say, he was the lead investigator on the Chris Watts case, Frederick Police, and in March 2019 he was diagnosed with acute PTSD. He's learned that through therapy it wasn't actually the cause, the case wasn't the cause of his PTSD, but it was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back, if you like. It was the final straw for him, and he's created a blog to share his story and hope that it will help others struggling with similar conditions. So I just wanted to read to you the post, really, and like I say, I think it speaks for itself. I don't really need to add much into it. So it was released 3 days ago, and it's titled "Don't Eat It." Hello again. I've drafted several posts since my last one in April, but I wrote them more for therapeutic reasons and not to share with the public. In today's society, many people expect full transparency and want to know all the details about anything and everything. I wholeheartedly disagree and state these people don't know what they're asking for. The same goes for people who support defunding the police. They have no idea what they're asking for. Many people believe that information which is made public to be more transparent somehow stops corruption and satisfies their need to know everything. Perhaps it does initially, but I present to you the opposite is also true. The more information released about a topic allows more opportunity for it to be spun, twisted, and completely reformed to meet someone's opinion and or provide monetary gain. If you're paying attention, you'll see it every day in the media, regardless of whether you lean left or right politically. Several people who have watched the true crime TV specials or read books about the Watts case and expressed disappointment in the publication's accuracy have asked me why I won't agree to an interview with producers or authors. The reason is I don't trust these people, these organisations, to not spin the facts in an attempt to sensationalise the case even more. Isn't what happened startling enough? The fact is, the facts of the case were made available by the DA's office shortly after Chris Watts was sentenced. Even so, these producers, authors, TV show hosts, etc. reportedly can't seem to get it correct. What's worse are the YouTube and the like conspiracy theorists who post videos for no other reason than to stir the pot and profit from it. I've heard about, from reliable sources, the most ridiculous crap that gets posted regarding the Watts case. I have absolutely no respect for people who post lies and intentional, gross inaccuracies for any reason, but especially for monetary gain. Do these people ever consider who and what they're making ridiculous statements about, and the effect that it has on the people personally involved in this case? Of course not. They're only thinking about themselves and how much money they can make. With all that stated, I'll also state that I like YouTube and use it often. I think it's a great source for people to share knowledge and experiences about similar interests. I have, i.e. fishing, cars, boats, etc., but not for the junk that I've been made aware of. Probably the most ridiculous topic I've heard about is that I retired because I'm upset over some alleged law enforcement conspiracy to cover up Nicole Kessinger's supposed criminal involvement in this case because her father is wealthy. Stop and think for a minute about how stupid that sounds and really is. An entire family was annihilated, and no amount of money would have stopped the investigation and silenced me or anyone about some alleged law enforcement conspiracy to cover things up. The idea of that is completely idiotic. Without going into the case too deeply, I'll state here and now that I put all I had into this case for the victims and surviving family. I wouldn't have stopped because someone is supposedly wealthy, and neither would the DA's office. The facts are I'm still employed by the town of Frederick and currently on medical leave for PTSD. Also, because I was the lead investigator, I know every minute detail of the Watts case and state with confidence that Nicole Kessinger or any other person would have been arrested if they had any criminal involvement. The case is closed and there is no additional investigation going on behind the scene. What you or I think of Ms. Kessinger morally is our prerogative, but as a believer I'll share an excerpt from Bible verse John 8:7. In this passage, a band of elders brought a woman caught in adultery to Jesus. The law of Moses demanded adultery be punished by stoning, and they asked Jesus what he would do. They said this to test him, so that they might have grounds to accuse him. If he recommended her release, he would be breaking the law of Moses, and if not, they could accuse him before Rome of inciting murder. But Jesus said nothing. He simply stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Once more Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman. Even if you're not a believer, let that sink in for a minute. I know this guy personally, and that's exactly what he would have done. Although this post is not specifically about PTSD, it is about mental health awareness. Think about how many times you were pissed off or felt depressed after watching or reading some media publication, and then think about the validity of what you just read or saw on TV. Does what you just learned add up and make sense? Bounce it off reliable, published facts if available, or take it all with a grain of salt. If all else fails, stop watching or reading these publications for a few days. See how you feel. It worked for me. When it seems like the world is coming apart at the seams, trust that it's not, and take a look outside of what spoonful is being offered to you and what you're going to eat. And with what appears to be overwhelming hate in society right now. Remember Bible verse Matthew 22:37-39. 37, Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind." 38, this is the first and great commandment. 39, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. All the best, Dave. So, from what Dave said, I think for anybody listening to this, for anybody who is new to the Watts case, of course, the Netflix documentary is just hit. There's a lot of interest in the case at the moment. People are going to be new to the case. I would just say to you this, listen to what Dave's saying. He's the lead investigator on that case. The case is closed. There's no further investigation being done in the background, whatever somebody might try and convince you of. Nicole Kessinger was not involved in that case. Never was. Never going to be. Please don't let someone try and talk you into thinking that she is in some way, years down the line, going to be arrested for this case. She's not. Please just listen and think, for anyone who's throwing you ridiculous conspiracy theories or trying to push facts down your throat that just aren't there. Think about why they're doing that. Are they trying to push you a certain narrative? Are they asking you to pay to listen to this stuff? Think about why they're doing it. You know, that's what I would say to you. Of course, everyone's entitled to listen to what they want, but particularly with the Christopher Watts case, there is so much baloney out there, so many conspiracies, so many people claiming that they know more than everybody else. This is a guy who was the lead investigator, okay? Case is closed. Chris is in prison where he belongs. Everything else is just noise. It really is just noise. It's people just trying to get noticed, to try and attach themselves to this case, to try and get some kind of notoriety, to try and get lots of views from people, which is fine, but just think about what they're saying to you. Think about the validity of what they're telling you regarding this case. If you really look and understand this case, it's really very simple. And the theory that was put out there is what happened. Chris has confessed. It's a very simple story of he fell out of love with his wife, he had an affair, and his mind went to crap, and he murdered his family. That really is the story. Okay, so I thought that was very interesting to me. I think that's important that a lot of people hear that, particularly on YouTube. And, you know, there are creators. We all know who the creators are. And they have put things out there like, you know, Dave quit because he saw the corruption in law enforcement and, you know, the corrupt DA and all that kind of crap. And some people believe it. And that's a real shame. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to, as I say, there's now a recording out there. It's on YouTube. If you go look, you find it. I think it was in August, around about, might have been 20th of August. And it's Chris Watts talking to his friend Anna and a legal representative. And it looks like he is trying to, behind the scenes, kind of lodge and form some kind of appeal against his sentence. He's claiming that he was coerced into confessing and his basic rights were violated. I think that's fundamentally what he's looking at, and he's looking for technicalities that maybe he can take advantage of. I mean, I don't know, maybe he thought by just telling them what they wanted to hear that maybe he thought they would just let him walk free. I mean, who knows? But you have to stop and think. You know, this is a man who has admitted to premeditated murder of his wife, of his two daughters, and his unborn son. This is a man who buried his wife in a shallow grave and then climbed the steps of two huge oil tanks in a field in Colorado where he worked. He held his daughters over 8-inch holes, and he dropped them in like they were trash. I mean, I hate to be blunt about it, but that is the crux of what he did to his family. This is a man who failed an FBI polygraph. A man who knew exactly where the bodies were. Who backed his truck up to his house, which he'd never done before. And then the GPS from that truck led to the site of where the bodies were. This is a man who looked a complete nervous wreck when he was watching his neighbour's CCTV of his truck and his house. A man who called the children's school the same day his family disappeared. Said that his children would be unenrolling from the school. A man who called the realtor to talk about selling the house. A man whose bed sheets were found thrown away in his bin. A man whose bed sheet was found out at the oil site where his family's bodies were. So like I say, we now know that he is planning to appeal. He's been spending time in the law library in Dodge, it sounds like, and God is pointing him to what he says, fruit of the poisonous tree. Which, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a legal phrase meaning that if the source of the evidence is tainted, then everything linked or everything gained from that evidence, i.e. the fruit, is also tainted. He also talks about the Brady rule, which basically concludes that the government violates the defendant's right to due and fair process if the state is withholding evidence that would be favourable for the defence and material to the defendant's guilt or punishment. He's also quoting Colorado Rule 35C, which is also known as post-conviction relief. And this states that somebody convicted of a crime in the state of Colorado can pursue motions in an attempt to vacate or lessen their sentence by spelling out to a court of law how that defendant was denied his or her constitutional rights to a fair trial and sentence. They can also try to argue that they were denied due process. Now, Rule 35C, just for point of reference, differs from an appeal in that an appeal, under request of the defendant, the case is reviewed by a higher court. But with a motion, a Rule 35C motion, the defendant seeks review from the same court that handled the case. So in this case, it would be Weld County District Court. However, with the Rule 35C motions, there are common grounds, or kind of that have to be met or accepted for it to become a viable motion. One, the defendant was illegally convicted or sentenced. That's one common ground. Two, the law under which the defendant is convicted is illegal. Three, the defendant's conduct was in fact legal. Four, the court did not have jurisdiction over the case. And five, new evidence of material facts that could not have been reasonably discovered prior to the conviction. So there are five kind of common points that normally are associated with this kind of motion. Now we hear that Chris is saying things like, I just want to get out of here. I know that God has a plan for me. God brought me here for a reason. But yet he also wants to see me on the outside. And he knows that God can teach him the law. He says he's never experienced anything like this in his life. From law enforcement to interrogation to jail to prison. Now he did talk about, on this telephone call that I heard, he did talk about the interrogation and the polygraph. He claims that at the time he was in shock and trauma in his mind. Every question they were asking him, Tammy Lee and Coda were asking him, he just agreed and went along with it, with what they said. He's claiming that he was, as I say, coerced, and that it was a psychological, intimidating exercise of somebody who hadn't been in that situation before, and they used that to their advantage against him. He just didn't know what was going on. He was exhausted at the point of the polygraph, and he also mentioned that he overheard one of the agents, when they went out of the room, he heard one of them say that he, meaning Chris, did pretty good on the polygraph. I think we can get some more out of him. I think maybe they meant he's doing pretty good in that he is confessing and he is helping them to find his family, which was the ultimate goal at that point. Now his legal advisor, whoever this guy is claiming that they didn't administer the polygraph in the proper way and Chris should have been allowed to properly rest. Now I would argue, let's remember that during this polygraph, I'm sure all of you have seen it many times, Chris was offered pizza, he was offered water, he was told several times that he could leave at any time. The door was open. They weren't holding him there. He could have left at any time. So I think we have to remember that. Let's also remember he scored -18 on that polygraph. He failed every question. They asked him, did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance? Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann? And do you know where Shanann is now? He failed every question. As I said before, he knew the location of the bodies. His truck GPS took him to where the bodies were found. They have the CCTV. The fact that he called the school and the realtor on that morning. The fact that the bed sheets were found in the bin. The fact that one of his bed sheets was found at the oil site. And then, of course, you got the second confession, which he made in prison in February 2019. And I'll take this straight from the FBI's interview with him, the summary, the official write-up from the FBI, when they asked him why he pled guilty. He said, I didn't want anybody else. I didn't want them to go through this for 2 or 4 years. I didn't want my attorneys to lie for me for 2 to 4 years. They would have done anything I told them to. I don't see how they can do that. That's what attorneys do, Like, they take the defendant and they say, hey, what happened? Okay, we'll go with that story. A few weeks after his arrest, he told his attorneys the truth about everything that happened. His attorneys asked him if he was ever offered a plea to plead guilty. Would he take it? He said he would plead guilty in order to end it all. His attorneys asked him about 100 times if he was sure he wanted to take the plea deal. I say that again. His attorneys asked him about 100 times if he was sure he wanted to take the plea deal. Because some people will say that he was railroaded and he was pushed into this. Well, that doesn't match up with what he said at his second confession prison interview. Before he walked into the courtroom, his attorneys asked him again if he was sure he wanted to take the plea deal. His attorneys never told him that he had to take it, and they had a lot of creative motions to file and were ready to fight. He told his attorney Walsh he didn't want him to fight for something where the story wasn't true, because it only would have gotten worse for everyone. He does not regret taking the plea deal, but he never thought he'd be in prison for the rest of his life. He didn't want for everyone to have to relive the case every day. He told his parents the night before he pled guilty that he was pleading guilty for a reason. So there you go. What's changed? What's changed? I think probably he's got a lot of time on his hands, obviously. Obviously, he's been looking up law. I would imagine there's probably people twittering in his ear, telling him things. I think there's a lot of those people are just doing it to try and attach himself to the case in some way, to try and get well known or to try and get notoriety for doing that. But we have to remember he still hasn't really shown any remorse, and he's not claiming any different story. I think he's trying to get out on technicality or something. I think that's what he's aiming for. Never ever mentioned anyone else being involved. People seem to be jumping on this train that now he's ready to tell the truth, because everything that he said so far is not the truth, and he's ready to confess again and tell everyone what really happened. Personally, I wouldn't believe that for a second. I think that's a whole load of gossip and baloney. I think he's probably just going to try and go on some kind of technicality. That's what it sounds like. Don't forget, he's in Wisconsin. He's not in Colorado, so he's got that to deal with as well. But I think I would just say one thing to Chris. If he was asking me, if I was some kind of legal person and he was asking me, if he should appeal, and I think I'd probably give him one simple answer, and that would be this. I would say, when you can bring back your family, when you can bring back Shanann, Bella, Celeste and Nico, when you can bring them back to your loved ones, to their loved ones, to their family and friends, when you can do that, then sure, why not? Then you can appeal, maybe. I mean, what do you guys think? I'd love to see your comments about how you feel about this proposed appeal.